Most people think overthinking is intelligence. They think the constant analysis, the endless replaying of conversations, the inability to relax, is proof that their mind is deeper than everyone else's. But what if overthinking is not depth? What if it's fear wearing the mask of intelligence? Because real intelligence eventually leads to clarity. Overthinking only leads to exhaustion. And the terrifying part is, most people don't even notice when it begins destroying them. It starts quietly. You replay a conversation after it ends. You analyze someone's tone. You reread messages searching for hidden meaning. You imagine future scenarios that haven't happened yet. You prepare for betrayals that exist only in your imagination. At first it feels productive. Your mind convinces you that you are protecting yourself, that if you think hard enough, deeply enough, long enough, you can avoid pain. But slowly something changes. You stop experiencing life directly. You begin experiencing life through mental simulations, and those simulations never stop. Carl Jung once suggested that what we refuse to confront consciously appears indirectly through patterns, anxiety, and projection. The mind begins creating noise when something deeper remains unresolved. That's why overthinking rarely comes from curiosity. It usually comes from psychological insecurity. A person at peace does not need to mentally rehearse every possible outcome before living, but someone who has been embarrassed, betrayed, judged, abandoned, starts trying to predict reality before reality arrives. Because uncertainty becomes dangerous to them, so they think and think and think, not to understand life, but to control it. But life cannot be controlled through thought alone. And this is where the destruction begins, because overthinking slowly separates you from instinct. You stop trusting your natural reactions. You stop trusting silence. You stop trusting people. Eventually, you stop trusting yourself. Every decision becomes heavy. Even simple things feel mentally exhausting. You begin treating ordinary interactions like psychological warfare. A delayed reply becomes rejection. A change in tone becomes disrespect. Distance becomes abandonment. Your mind turns neutral events into emotional threats, and after enough time, you no longer see reality clearly. You see your fears reflected onto reality. That is the hidden danger of overthinking. It does not sharpen perception, it distorts it. The human mind is not built to stay trapped in constant self-observation, because excessive self-awareness eventually becomes paralysis. You become hyper-aware of how you sound, how you look, how others perceive you, what they secretly think about you. And ironically, the more you analyze yourself, the less natural you become. People can feel it, not consciously, but instinctively. Because overthinking changes your energy before it changes your behavior. You hesitate more. You filter yourself more. You become careful instead of present, and careful people rarely feel alive. They feel trapped inside themselves. Most people don't resent your weakness. They resent the possibility that you might outgrow them. But overthinking keeps you small, not physically, psychologically, because a mind consumed by analysis has very little energy left for action. There's a moment that happens to almost everyone who overthinks. A strange moment. You realize you are no longer living your life. You are watching yourself live it. Almost like there's a second person inside your head constantly evaluating everything you do. While talking to someone, part of your mind is monitoring your words. While laughing, another part questions whether the laugh sounded genuine. While resting, you feel guilty for not being productive enough. Even in silence, the mind keeps narrating. You become both the prisoner and the observer. And eventually, the observer becomes cruel, because the overthinking mind is never satisfied with uncertainty. It demands explanations for everything. Why did they look at me differently? Why did they stop texting first? Why do I feel disconnected lately? What if I fail? What if they secretly dislike me? What if I become irrelevant? The questions multiply faster than answers ever can. And that's because the mind isn't searching for truth anymore. It's searching for emotional safety, but safety is addictive. Once the brain learns that excessive thinking creates the illusion of control, it becomes dependent on analysis itself. That's why overthinking feels impossible to stop. You are not addicted to thought. You are addicted to temporary certainty, even if it destroys your peace. This is why some people cannot sleep without mentally replaying their entire life before bed. why they feel exhausted after simple conversations, why they constantly imagine worst-case scenarios even during good moments. The mind begins preparing for pain before pain arrives. And over time, anticipation becomes identity. You become the careful one, the self-aware one, the deep thinker. But underneath all those labels is usually the same hidden fear. If I stop thinking, something bad will happen. That fear quietly controls millions of people, not through violence, not through trauma, but through mental exhaustion. Because exhausted people become passive and they hesitate, delay, observe, wait too long, and life punishes hesitation more brutally than failure. A failed decision teaches you something. Indecision teaches you helplessness. That's why overthinkers often watch opportunities disappear in front of them while less intelligent people move forward confidently. Confidence is not always intelligence. Sometimes it's simply freedom from internal noise. And that realization is painful, because overthinkers secretly believe their suffering should make them wiser than everyone else. But suffering without awareness only creates repetition. The same relationship patterns, the same self-doubt, the same emotional cycles, again and again, until the person no longer remembers what mental silence even feels like. Carl Jung believed that the parts of ourselves we suppress do not disappear. They grow stronger in the dark. Overthinking often becomes the mind's way of avoiding confrontation with deeper emotions: loneliness, resentment, jealousy, fear of insignificance. Instead of feeling these emotions directly, the mind distracts itself through endless analysis. Thinking becomes emotional avoidance, and this is why many intelligent people remain emotionally trapped for years, because intellect can explain pain without ever healing it. You can understand your patterns completely and still remain controlled by them. That's the terrifying part. Awareness alone does not free you. Sometimes awareness simply gives the prison a name. Kindness without boundaries quietly teaches people how to use you, and overthinking works the same way. The more your mind learns that fear controls your attention, the more fear begins dominating your entire inner world. Over time, overthinking changes the way you see people. You stop meeting individuals, you start meeting possibilities. Every person becomes a psychological equation. Every interaction becomes something to decode. You look for hidden intentions in simple behavior. You search for betrayal before trust even has the chance to form. And eventually, relationships become exhausting. Not because others are difficult, but because your mind never stops scanning for danger. This is how overthinking slowly destroys intimacy. Because intimacy requires presence, but presence is impossible when your mind is constantly escaping into prediction. You cannot fully connect with someone while simultaneously analyzing how they might hurt you later. So you become emotionally divided. Part of you wants closeness. Another part prepares for disappointment. And people can feel that contradiction, and not through words, through tension. Human beings are far more instinctive than they pretend to be. They notice hesitation, emotional guardedness, forced reactions, hyper-awareness. They may not understand why they feel distant from you, but they feel it. Because overthinking creates invisible walls. The tragedy is that many overthinkers believe they are becoming wiser with age. In reality, many are simply becoming more psychologically defensive. There's a difference. Wisdom simplifies, fear complicates. A wise mind observes reality clearly. A fearful mind interprets reality endlessly. And modern life rewards this dysfunction. Social media intensified it. Constant comparison intensified it. Endless information intensified it. Now people don't just overthink their conversations. They overthink their identity. Who am I compared to others? Am I behind in life? Am I attractive enough? Successful enough? Interesting enough? The mind becomes trapped inside permanent self-evaluation. And the darker part is this. Most people are not even thinking independently anymore. They are reacting psychologically to invisible social pressure. Carl Jung warned that people who fail to understand themselves become vulnerable to collective influence. They unconsciously absorb the fears, desires, and expectations of the crowd. That is exactly what overthinking does. It disconnects you from your own instincts and reconnects you to external validation. You stop asking, "What do I actually want?" and start asking, "What will make me accepted?" That shift destroys authenticity slowly, not all at once, quietly, like rust spreading beneath metal. You begin censoring parts of yourself, editing your personality, hiding opinions, suppressing impulses. Until one day you realize something disturbing. You no longer know which version of yourself is real. The private version, the social version, the online version, the version people expect. Too much self-monitoring fractures identity. This is why some people feel strangely empty even while appearing successful. Because they built an identity based on adaptation instead of truth. And overthinking accelerates this process. It turns the personality into a performance designed to avoid rejection. But here's the irony. The more desperately people try to avoid rejection, the less genuine they become. And humans instinctively distrust what feels unnatural. Most relationships don't end when respect disappears. They end when awareness appears. The moment someone realizes they are interacting with a mask instead of a real person, emotional distance begins growing immediately. That's why overthinking often creates the exact outcomes it fears. Fear of rejection creates neediness. Fear of abandonment creates emotional control. Fear of judgment creates inauthenticity. The mind becomes so obsessed with preventing pain that it unconsciously manufactures it. At some point, the overthinking mind begins turning against itself completely. Not dramatically, silently. You wake up tired before the day even starts. Simple decisions feel heavy. Conversations feel draining. Your body is present, but your attention is somewhere else entirely. Inside your own head. That's the hidden cost nobody talks about. Overthinking steals energy before life even has the chance to touch you, because the brain cannot distinguish clearly between imagined stress and real stress. To the nervous system, repeated mental threat simulation still feels like danger, so the body adapts accordingly. Tension becomes normal, restlessness becomes normal, emotional numbness becomes normal. And eventually, chaos starts feeling safer than peace. That's why many overthinkers struggle in calm environments. Silence unsettles them. Healthy relationships feel boring. Stability feels suspicious. Peace feels temporary. The mind becomes addicted to psychological noise because noise feels familiar, and familiarity is one of the strongest forces in human behavior. Even suffering becomes comforting when it is predictable enough. That realization changes the way you see people. You start noticing how many individuals unconsciously recreate the emotional environments that damage them. The neglected person chases emotionally unavailable people. The betrayed person searches for hidden betrayal everywhere. The rejected person becomes obsessed with external approval, not because they enjoy pain, because the nervous system prefers familiar pain over unfamiliar peace. Carl Jung described something deeply unsettling about human nature. Until the unconscious becomes conscious, it directs your life while you believe you are making free choices. Most people never realize how much of their behavior is automated. Especially overthinkers. They believe they are hyperconscious. But many are simply trapped in compulsive mental loops they mistake for awareness. Real awareness creates clarity. Compulsion creates repetition. And repetition slowly becomes destiny. Look carefully at someone who constantly overthinks. Their mind is rarely focused on the present moment. It's usually trapped in one of three places: regret, fear, or imagined judgment. Very rarely reality itself. That's why overthinking gradually disconnects people from life's simplest experiences. Food loses taste because the mind is elsewhere. Moments lose emotional depth because attention is fragmented. Even achievements feel empty because anxiety immediately moves the goalpost. Nothing is ever enough for a mind that cannot stop scanning for danger. And eventually, the person starts mistaking emotional exhaustion for maturity. They think, "I've seen too much. I understand people too well. I can't trust easily anymore." But often what they call wisdom is unresolved fear hardened into personality. That is one of the darkest transformations a human can undergo, when survival mechanisms become identity, because once fear merges with identity, the person stops trying to heal it. They defend it, protect it, rationalize it. A paranoid person calls themselves observant. An emotionally detached person calls themselves independent. An overthinker calls themselves deep. Labels become psychological camouflage. And the more intelligent the person is, the more convincing the camouflage becomes. Intelligence can hide dysfunction extremely well, especially from the person experiencing it. The mind learns sophisticated ways to justify its own prison. And that prison becomes harder to escape because the bars are made from thoughts that sound reasonable. The most dangerous part of overthinking is not anxiety, it's hesitation. Because hesitation slowly teaches you to betray your own instincts. You feel something immediately, then your mind interrupts it. You want to speak honestly, then you overanalyze the consequences. You feel drawn towards someone, then you imagine every possible way it could end badly. You want to take action, then your thoughts create 20 reasons to wait, and after enough repetition, a fracture forms inside the personality. Instinct says one thing, fear says another. Most people obey fear, not because fear is stronger, because fear sounds logical. That's why overthinking is so deceptive. It rarely appears irrational from the inside. It appears responsible, careful, intelligent. But there's a thin line between awareness and self-imprisonment. Overthinkers cross that line slowly, one hesitation at a time, and eventually they develop a habit that quietly destroys human potential. They confuse preparation with progress. Thinking about life becomes a substitute for living it. Analyzing confidence becomes easier than embodying it. Studying relationships becomes easier than risking vulnerability. Imagining success becomes easier than facing failure. The mind creates endless simulations because simulations feel safer than reality. Reality can wound you, thoughts cannot, but thoughts can slowly erase your ability to act. That's the trade, safety in exchange for aliveness. Most people never consciously realize they made that trade. They simply wake up years later wondering why they feel disconnected from themselves. Because life rewards movement, even imperfect movement. Nature itself operates through motion. Blood moves, time moves, seasons move. Only frightened minds become stagnant. And stagnation creates decay, psychologically, emotionally, spiritually. There's another disturbing truth hidden beneath overthinking. Many people are terrified of discovering who they actually are without constant mental distraction. Silence exposes things: regret, envy, emptiness, loneliness, meaninglessness. When the mind becomes quiet, unresolved emotions rise to the surface. That's why some people compulsively consume information, entertainment, conversations, noise, not for pleasure, for escape. A silent mind forces confrontation, and confrontation changes people permanently. Carl Jung believed that avoiding your inner darkness does not weaken it, it strengthens it indirectly. The shadow grows through avoidance, and overthinking is often one of the shadow's favorite disguises, because it feels productive while accomplishing nothing internally. You can spend years analyzing yourself without ever changing, years understanding trauma without healing it, years understanding people without trusting them, years understanding fear without confronting it. Knowledge becomes another hiding place, a sophisticated one, and modern culture encourages this endlessly. People collect psychological terms like armor, attachment styles, trauma labels, personality frameworks, but self-description is not self-transformation. A person can explain every wound they have and still remain completely controlled by those wounds. That realization unsettles people because it destroys the illusion that awareness alone saves you. It doesn't. Sometimes awareness simply deepens the tragedy, because now you can watch yourself self-destruct consciously. People often imagine destruction as something dramatic, but most psychological destruction happens quietly, in delayed decisions, unsent messages, missed opportunities, unspoken truths. Constant second-guessing, a life slowly narrowed by fear disguised as thought. And the terrifying part is this: the overthinking mind usually believes it is protecting itself, while silently becoming the source of its own suffering. Eventually, something strange begins happening to the overthinking mind. It loses its ability to feel reality clearly, not because reality disappeared, because thought became louder than experience. You can sit beside people you love and still feel mentally distant. You can achieve something meaningful and feel almost nothing afterward. You can stare at a beautiful moment while your mind drifts somewhere darker. The present moment becomes inaccessible. And without presence, life starts feeling unreal. That's why many overthinkers secretly feel disconnected from themselves. Not sad exactly, not broken exactly, just absent, as if they are watching life through glass. And over time, this creates another dangerous illusion, the belief that thinking more will eventually solve the emptiness. But emptiness cannot always be solved intellectually. Some things must be experienced directly, felt directly, confronted directly. That's what the overthinking mind fears most. Direct experience. Because direct experience removes control. When you truly love someone, there are no guarantees. When you pursue something meaningful, failure becomes possible. When you speak honestly, rejection becomes possible. Reality always contains risk. Thought tries to eliminate risk entirely, and in doing so, it slowly eliminates life itself. This is why overthinking often intensifies as people become emotionally disconnected. The less they feel alive internally, the more the mind compensates through endless activity, more analysis, more stimulation, more distraction. But distraction never resolves inner fragmentation. It only delays confrontation, and eventually the mind becomes exhausted from carrying unresolved emotional weight for too long. That exhaustion changes personality. Some become cynical, some become emotionally cold, some become numb, some become addicted to constant validation, some isolate themselves completely. Different masks, same emptiness underneath. The frightening part is how socially acceptable this has become. People praise exhaustion now. They praise constant mental activity. They praise being busy all the time. Stillness almost feels unnatural in modern society. A person sitting quietly with their thoughts appears unproductive. A person constantly occupied appears successful, but many busy minds are simply running from themselves. And the faster they run, the less they understand why they feel empty despite achieving things they once wanted. Carl Jung once wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." That sentence explains more human behavior than most people realize. Many overthinkers are not afraid of failure. They are afraid of what silence might reveal about them, because underneath the endless thoughts is often a painful truth they avoid naming. Maybe they built their identity around pleasing others. Maybe they sacrificed authenticity for acceptance. Maybe they chased validation instead of meaning. Maybe they became so psychologically fragmented that they no longer know what they genuinely feel anymore. Thought protects them from seeing it clearly, but protection has a cost. Every defense mechanism eventually demands sacrifice. Overthinking sacrifices peace, presence, spontaneity, intuition. It turns life into observation instead of participation, and slowly the person forgets something essential. Human beings were not designed to think their way through existence every second of the day. Some things are meant to be lived before they are understood. Maybe that is the final irony of overthinking. The person spends their entire life trying to avoid pain, only to create a quieter, slower form of suffering that never leaves them. Not sharp suffering, chronic suffering, the kind that follows you into ordinary moments, the kind that steals meaning from achievements, the kind that makes rest feel uncomfortable and silence feel threatening. Because the overthinking mind is never truly at peace. It is always preparing for betrayal, preparing for embarrassment, preparing for loss, preparing for judgment. But a mind constantly preparing for life eventually forgets how to live it, and that changes everything. You begin realizing how many people are psychologically absent from their own existence. They eat without tasting, listen without hearing, speak without honesty, love without vulnerability, always somewhere else mentally, usually in fear. That's why overthinking is not just a habit. It becomes an entire way of existing, a defensive posture against reality itself. And the longer someone stays trapped in it, the more disconnected they become from instinct. Instinct is fast, natural, alive. Overthinking interrupts instinct constantly. It forces every emotion through layers of analysis until the original feeling becomes unrecognizable. This is why many overthinkers eventually lose trust in themselves. Not because they are incapable, but because they have trained themselves to question every internal signal they receive. Imagine living like that for years. Every decision filtered through doubt, every relationship filtered through fear, every opportunity filtered through imagined disaster. Eventually, the personality becomes fragile from excessive self-monitoring, because people become strongest when action and instinct move together, not when thought suffocates both. There's a reason children appear more alive than most adults. Children experience reality directly. Adults interpret reality endlessly. And somewhere during that transition, Many people lose contact with the raw immediacy of being alive. They become mental spectators of their own existence, watching, evaluating, predicting, rarely living. Carl Jung believed that wholeness comes not from perfection, but from integrating the hidden parts of yourself instead of endlessly fleeing them. That means the solution to overthinking is not becoming mentally stronger. It is becoming honest enough to face what the mind keeps trying to outrun: fear, loneliness, shame, insignificance, mortality. The thoughts themselves are often distractions from deeper truths, and once you see that, human behavior starts looking very different. You notice how many conversations are performances, how many ambitions are compensation, how many personalities are built around avoiding rejection. You stop seeing confidence the same way. You stop seeing intelligence the same way. You stop seeing yourself the same way. Because beneath most psychological complexity is usually something painfully simple: a human being trying to protect themselves from pain. But pain avoided consciously does not disappear. It waits, in habits, in relationships, in anxiety, in emotional numbness, in overthinking, until one day the person realizes something deeply unsettling. Their mind was never protecting them from life. It was protecting them from themselves, and in that process, they lost years trapped inside thoughts that never truly led anywhere. That is the tragedy of overthinking. Not that it destroys the mind quickly, but that it slowly convinces a person to abandon reality while believing they are becoming more aware of it.